big shout out to LitRPG Reads and to Paul Bellow, fine fellow,
Yeah.
for inspiring today's deep dive. And it's funny because I was just DMing a session and things got a little crazy. Just picture this. You've got the party's rogue. Now this guy, notorious for sticky fingers, decided to try and pickpocket a ghost.
Oh, wow.
I know, right? Talk about a challenge rating I was not prepared for.
Yeah.
Oh, the chaos. Spectral loot flying everywhere. The party's cleric, nearly had like a divine meltdown.
Yeah.
Total improv on my part. But you know what? It made for a pretty unforgettable encounter.
That's a great example of how, those unexpected situations can create the best D&D moments, and it kind of speaks to a point that was made in the LitRPG Reads article, How to Be a D&D Dungeon Master, a beginner's guide, which is what we're diving into today. The article really emphasizes that as a DM, you're not just like a rule enforcer or a narrator, you're like a conductor of chaos, a weaver of narratives.
Okay, so conductor of chaos, I like that.
Yeah.
But the article lays out these three core areas of responsibility for dungeon masters. World building, facilitating gameplay, and creating those engaging encounters. I think for a lot of aspiring dungeon masters, world building feels like the most daunting part. It's just like, where do you even begin? When you're creating an entire world from scratch.
It's understandable to feel overwhelmed. Just
Yeah.
imagine, you're painting on this massive canvas. You wouldn't start with tiny little details, right? You'd start with broad strokes, establish the major land masses, key cities, maybe a few defining landmarks. Think of it like sketching a map, for your players to explore. As they venture deeper, you can start adding more details, flesh out cultures, histories, secrets. That's what really brings your world to life.
Speaking of maps, I remember when I was starting out DMing, I struggled with those. How do you make them both functional for the gameplay but also visually appealing? Because a good map, let's be honest, can really draw players in.
Yeah, there are lots of different approaches, and the best one really depends on your style, your campaign's tone. Hand-drawn maps have a certain classic charm. You can make adjustments on the fly, but there are some really cool digital tools out there that can create these incredibly immersive and detailed maps. You can even find pre-made maps online and just tailor them to fit your world. I think the key is having that visual aid. Something to ground your players, help them visualize their journey, and just understand their place within the world you're creating.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what about populating your world? I mean, we've got the geography, but it needs people. So how do you go about creating compelling NPCs? Ones that aren't just quest givers or shopkeepers, I want NPCs that leave a lasting impression.
You got to think of NPCs as the heart and soul of your world. They inject depth, intrigue, and just endless possibilities for role-playing. When you're creating them, prioritize those distinct personalities, motivations, even quirks, like that ghost with a knack for pickpocketing. Don't be afraid to borrow inspiration from real people, historical figures, even characters you love from books or movies.
Oh, that reminds me. I had this one campaign where I created this hilarious dwarven bartender.
Yeah.
Super grumpy, totally obsessed with brewing the perfect ale.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, the problem was he had lost his prized recipe to this band of thieving kobolds. And wouldn't you know it, my players got totally hooked on helping him recover it.
I love it.
It turned into this whole side quest full of drunken brawls and ridiculous antics. And in the end, it was surprisingly heartwarming, the dwarf being reunited with his recipe. The players still talk about it.
That's fantastic. And what's interesting is that your player's investment in that side quest, it really highlights another core DM responsibility, facilitating gameplay. It's more than just presenting a well-crafted story and, intriguing characters. You're the conductor, making sure the game flows smoothly and remains engaging.
Right, it's about making sure everyone's having fun. But that brings up pacing. How do you keep things moving without rushing the players or glossing over important details? It feels like a tricky balance to strike.
It definitely is. You don't want those moments where players are just sitting around bored. But you also don't want to railroad them, force them through a predetermined plot. I think a good guiding principle is to focus on player agency. What are their goals? What are they working towards? Use those as guideposts to structure your sessions. Let's say the party is trying to reach some ancient ruins hidden deep in a forest. Instead of just saying, okay, now you travel for 3 days, you might say, you're searching for these ruins. How do you want to approach this?
I see. So it's about giving them choices that shape their experience. But what about the rules? Do new DMs need to obsess over knowing every single detail? I know I felt pretty intimidated by that massive rulebook when I first started.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. The rules are there to provide structure, but they shouldn't feel like a straitjacket. Understanding the spirit of the rules is more important than memorizing every single one. Don't be afraid to make rulings on the fly, as long as they're fair and consistent. If you get stuck on a rule, just consult the book, or even get your players involved in the discussion. Remember, D&D is a collaborative game.
It sounds like there's a theme emerging here. Flexibility, collaboration, empowering the players. It seems like those are the pillars of successful DMing.
Absolutely, and these principles become even more crucial when you're crafting those engaging encounters, the moments that get players' hearts racing.
Yeah, the encounters are where the action really heats up. Combat, puzzles, social interactions, all those situations where players' choices have real consequences.
Exactly, but creating a compelling encounter goes beyond just throwing a random monster or a trap at your players. It's about designing challenges that are thematically relevant, meaningful, and tailored to each character's strengths and weaknesses.
So for example, if you've got a really skilled rogue in the party, you might incorporate elements of stealth, infiltration, or puzzle solving into the encounter. Give them a chance to shine.
Right, you want to give each player opportunities to use their unique skills and abilities, whether it's their character's strength or their skill in persuasion. And don't forget to think about the narrative context. Why are the players facing this specific challenge? How does it tie into the larger story?
Speaking of narrative, the article emphasizes weaving player backstories into the game. How do you do that effectively? I've struggled with it, feeling forced sometimes.
Let's say a player's backstory involves being betrayed by a powerful wizard. You can introduce an NPC connected to that wizard, or maybe even the wizard themselves, creating a personal stake for that player. Or perhaps a hidden clue surfaces, something directly related to their character's history and motivations. It's about finding those little ways to make players feel like their characters are an integral part of the world.
Yeah, it's like you're planting these seeds that can blossom into these compelling storylines. But let's be real, even with the best planning, sometimes things go off script. What about those curveballs? Like when players do something totally unexpected, or you get into like a rules dispute that could derail the whole session.
Oh man, I know those moments all too well. No matter how prepared you are, players always find a way to surprise you. And sometimes those surprises involve some pretty passionate debates about how to interpret the rules, which honestly can get a little heated. Yeah, for sure. And handling those situations gracefully, that's a key skill for any DM. You're not just a referee, you're a mediator, a diplomat. Sometimes even a therapist. It's about keeping the game flowing while also making sure everyone feels heard and respected.
So let's talk about rules disputes first. It's tempting to just, pull rank, say, look, the rule book says this, end of discussion. But that can feel dismissive, especially if a player truly believes they're interpreting the rule correctly.
Right, you don't want to shut down that conversation. Remember, rules are guidelines, not unbreakable laws. Often there's room for interpretation. When a dispute pops up, the first thing you do is just pause the game, acknowledge the disagreement, give everyone a chance to explain their perspective, calmly and respectfully. Then you consult the rulebook together. A lot of times, just reading the rule out loud clears things up.
But what if the rulebook isn't clear? Or there are, multiple interpretations that all seem valid? What do you do then?
That's where you, as the DM, need to make a judgment call. You make a ruling based on fairness, consistency with the overall spirit of the rules, and, what keeps the game moving forward. And don't be afraid to say something like, okay, this is tricky, let's make a ruling for now, and we can discuss it more after the session if we need to.
Got it. So transparency and flexibility are key. But doesn't that open the door for players to constantly challenge your rulings?
That's a fair point. But remember, you're trying to create a collaborative storytelling experience. Sometimes the best approach is to just involve the players. Ask them what they think is fair. They're invested in the game, and their input can often lead to a solution everyone's happy with.
That makes a lot of sense. It's their game, too. It's not just the DM's dictatorship. But what about those conflicts that go beyond just the rules, like those personality clashes or interpersonal tensions that can, sometimes happen at the table? Those feel way more delicate to handle.
Yeah, player conflicts can be a lot trickier, for sure. They might come from disagreements about in-game strategy, or even just interpersonal dynamics that exist outside the game. As the DM, it's important to try and address these conflicts before they escalate.
Okay, so how do you do that? Are we talking full-on couples therapy here? Because I didn't sign up to be a relationship guru.
Maybe not full-on therapy. But the principles are kind of similar. Create a safe space for open and respectful communication. Listen actively to what everyone has to say, validate their perspectives, and help them understand each other's point of view. You're not there to judge, you're just facilitating the conversation and trying to guide them towards a resolution.
So sometimes just giving people the space to vent and feel heard can help to diffuse the situation.
A lot of times, that's all it takes. But sometimes you might need to help them find a compromise, or at least agree to disagree respectfully. The goal is to find a solution that lets everyone continue to enjoy the game.
And what if the conflict is coming from something outside the game, like a personal disagreement? Do you address that during the session, or should that be a separate conversation?
If it's affecting the game, it needs to be addressed. Encourage open communication and remind everyone that the goal is for everyone to have fun. If the conflict is serious or ongoing, you might need to have a separate conversation outside the session.
You know, it's really interesting how DMing requires all these skills that go beyond just knowing the rules and telling a good story. Mediation, counseling, diplomacy. It's like a crash course in human interaction. No wonder so many new DMs feel intimidated.
It's true. Stepping into that role can feel daunting, knowing you're responsible for creating this fun and engaging experience for everyone. Building confidence is key, but that takes time and practice.
About it. I was so nervous when I first started DMing. So much to learn, so much to keep track of, and the pressure to get everything perfect can be paralyzing.
It's perfectly normal to feel overwhelmed. But remember, no DM is perfect and you're going to make mistakes. The key is to embrace those mistakes as learning opportunities, keep practicing, and you'll become more comfortable and confident over time.
So what advice would you give to those aspiring DMs who are struggling with imposter syndrome? How can they build that confidence?
Start small. Don't feel like you need to jump right into an epic, sprawling campaign. Start with a one-shot adventure or a pre-written module. It's a great way to learn the mechanics and get comfortable with the DM role without feeling overwhelmed.
Right, start in the shallow end of the pool. But what about that fear of messing up? How do you get over that?
Just remember, mistakes are part of the process. They're opportunities for growth. After each session, take some time to reflect on what happened, think about what you could have done differently, and use those lessons in your next game. And most importantly, don't be afraid to ask your players for feedback. They're your collaborators, and their input is invaluable.
Absolutely. They're the ones experiencing the story you're all creating together. And speaking of collaboration, it's a good reminder that DMing is ultimately about having fun together. It's about creating an experience where everyone feels engaged, empowered, and entertained.
I love that. It's about the laughter, the shared triumphs, the epic fails, all those things that make D&D so special. And it all starts with a passionate, confident DM who's committed to creating a world where anything is possible.
That's a great way to put it. But before we get too lost in the warm and fuzzies, let's circle back to the LitRPG Reads article. I was really impressed with Kenny Kings, the author. You can tell he's got a real passion for D&D, and his advice is so practical and relatable.
I agree. And you know what's funny? He actually has a connection to, you guessed it, Paul Bellow, our fine fellow.
Yeah.
They met during a long-running D&D campaign and have been friends ever since. It just shows how this game can bring people together and create these lasting bonds.
It's amazing, right? The power of storytelling and the role that DMs play in facilitating these shared experiences. It's a privilege and a responsibility, and I don't take it lightly. It's also incredibly rewarding. I'm so grateful for every chance I get to step into that role and bring a world to life for my players.
Beautifully said. And as we approach the end of this deep dive, I have a question for you, dear listener, and for every aspiring DM out there. What about Dungeons & Dragons draws you in? What stories are you burning to tell? What worlds are you eager to explore?
Yeah, what challenges get you excited? And what triumphs do you hope to share with your players? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because we're really eager to hear what inspires you as a Dungeon Master. You know, the journey of the Dungeon Master, it's one of continuous learning and growth.
Right, you're always discovering something new, a new skill to master, a new story to tell. That's what keeps it so fresh and exciting. I mean, think about it. You can dive into this hobby for years, even decades, and it never gets old. You're essentially creating worlds, crafting these narratives, bringing characters to life. It's like being a writer, a director, an actor, all rolled into one.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And you're doing it collaboratively with people who share your passion. It's a shared experience, and it creates these lasting memories, these friendships. I think one of the things that makes D&D so special is that it lets people step outside of themselves, you know, explore different perspectives. You can be a brave warrior, a cunning rogue, a wise wizard. The possibilities are endless.
I've seen firsthand how D&D can bring people together, help them develop social skills. I've had players who were like super shy and hesitant at first, and they blossom into these confident role players. It's really incredible to see.
It speaks to the power of the game. I mean, it's more than just a game, right? It's a tool for personal growth, social connection, creative expression, and it's accessible to anyone, no matter your age, background, experience.
That's what I love about it. It's truly inclusive, and it's always evolving. New additions, new adventures, new communities popping up all the time.
So if you're listening and you've ever been curious about D&D, or if you're a seasoned player thinking about becoming a DM, I say go for it.
Absolutely. There's a whole world of adventure waiting. Just a dice roll away. Gather your friends, grab your dice, and get ready for an epic journey. Who knows what amazing stories you'll create together.
And remember, if you ever need some guidance or inspiration on your DMing journey, you can always turn to, the wisdom of Kenny Kings and the fine folks at LitRPG Reads. Their passion for the game is truly contagious.
And with that, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of dungeon mastering. We hope you've enjoyed the journey, and we can't wait to see what incredible adventures you create out there.